What exactly is classical Christian education, and how is it different from other schools? And why does such a simple question often lead to such complicated answers? Is it just about nostalgia, a returning to the past, or is it a time-tested way to form students with wisdom to be ready for whatever the future holds? We're digging into those questions and more on today's episode on our series on what is classical Christian education. Join us now for this episode of BaseCamp Live.
Mountains. We all face them as we seek to influence the next generation. Get equipped to conquer the challenges, summit the peak, and shape exceptionally thoughtful, compassionate, and flourishing human beings. We call it Ancient Future Education for raising the next generation. Welcome to BaseCamp Live. Now your host, Davies Owens.
Welcome to another episode. Davies Owens, your host here on the journey with you, raising the next generation. One of the great joys I have as I travel around the country and speak at various schools is to engage with those of you who are part of the BaseCamp Live listeners. Some of you come up to me and say, I've been listening for years, and many of you have said, I am brand new. I didn't even know you were out there, and now I've found out about you. And I want to say thank you to those of you who are new listeners, and in particular, those of you who have said, and furthermore, I've gone ahead and dug into many of the past episodes. If you are not familiar, because we've been doing this for 8 years, there are a lot of episodes that are evergreen, meaning they're still relevant today, even if they were recorded long ago on very important topics. If you go to basecamplive.com, you can search for different people that I've interviewed or particular topics that are of interest to you. All that to say, thank you for listening. It's not a really great podcast if no one's out there listening, and yet there are people all over the world that are part of the BaseCamp Live family. And in particular, just a really special shout out and thank you to a couple schools and school leaders today, to Glenn Fisher, head of school at Redeemer Classical Christian School in Kingsville, Maryland, along with Peter Larson, head of school at All Saints Academy in Silverdale, Washington. Thank you for being a part of the BaseCamp Live family, as well as Zipcast. Thank you for your teachers and your parents and your whole community being a part of this great partnership we have of raising the next generation. On this particular episode, I want to say thanks as well to our sponsors, to the Herzog Foundation and the great work and partnership that we have with them. Wilson Hill Academy, the folks at the Wise Phone, a great alternative to a smartphone, which is a resource that we would all do well not to have to deal with every day. But if you need just utilitarian help, Wise Phone is a great solution for that, as well as the folks at the Champion Group. And then finally, our own Zipcast. You hear me talk about Zipcast. Many of you are in Zipcast schools. We are still onboarding schools year-round right now. Go to zipcast.media. It's the best way I know each week for school leaders to connect with parents in their actual voices, blending national experts on parenting and education with the things that are happening there locally at your own school. My guest today, Dr. David Diener, is no stranger to BaseCamp Live. In fact, one of the top episodes in terms of just numbers of downloads over the last few years has been my past episode with Dr. David Diener on the topic of the telos, or the end, the main purpose of education. So I thought I couldn't think of anybody better to help me in this series we're doing on what is classical Christian than Dr. David Diener. He's an assistant professor of education at Hillsdale College and the executive director of the Alcuin Fellowship. He previously spent 15 years in K-12 private education, 11 of those in administration, and 8 as a headmaster of a classical Christian school. He serves on the board of the directors for the Society for Classical Learning and the board of academic advisors for the CLT Classic Learning Test. He's also the author of Plato, the Great Philosopher Educator, and has published articles on Plato, Kierkegaard, and various topics in the area of the philosophy of education. He also serves as a series editor for Classical Academic Press and the Giants in the History of Education series. David holds a BA in philosophy and ancient languages from Wheaton College, as well as a master's in philosophy and in history and philosophy of education, has a dual PhD in philosophy and the philosophy of education. All that to say, he is most qualified to help us answer this question. So let's jump in to this conversation with Dr. David Diener. Well, Dr. David Diener, welcome back to BaseCamp Live.
Hey, thank you so much, Davies. Great to be with you as always.
It's always good to be with you, David. You know, you and I were just chatting before we hit record. I think the last time we were together, we were recording on the topic of the telos of education a few years ago. And that episode is still very popular. And if folks haven't found it, they should go out and listen to it. But at any rate, we've started this new series on just what is classical Christian education. I remember a few years ago, I was at a school conference, and I was walking around we had a little film crew, and we just walked up to Christian classical educators and said, "What is classical Christian education?" And it's really a rather painful and humorous 5-minute video where there's lots of fumbling and mentionings of things like Romans and triviums and other things, and not really a good answer to it. So I thought we'd go to you, the expert. You do this every day. Share with people a little bit of what you do every day and kind of some of the unique vantage point you have in answering this question.
Sure, yeah. Well, I am currently a professor in the education department at Hillsdale College, and I have the privilege of teaching both undergraduate and graduate students. We have an in-person 2-year master's degree program, as well as a hybrid 3-year program for a master's degree in classical education, and then our undergrad classical education program. So I get to teach a whole variety of courses in philosophy of education. I'm teaching a course right now on technology, education, and human flourishing, various topics in the history and philosophy of education, as well as some practical administrative things for people who are thinking about going into future administration. I'm also the executive director of the Alcuin Fellowship, which is an organization that's existed for over 15 years and seeks to provide intellectual leadership for classical Christian education. So I get to interact with a lot of great people through that as well.
Yeah.
And before I worked as a professor full-time, I was in K-12 classical Christian education for many years. I was in K-12 education for like 15 years and served in administrative roles for over a decade, headmaster of 2 different schools. So I think my perspective on this, these questions comes from a variety of angles. And part of what I really try to do in the things that I write and when I speak and I'm talking to people is to try to bring together the world of theory and practice, because I care deeply about the philosophical principles that underlie this and the history, but also know what it means on Tuesday morning and for a parent or a student or a teacher. So try to bring those perspectives together.
Which is, I knew you would be one of the best folks to ask this question to you. So what do you say to the neighbor next door when they go, "Hey, David, you're in this classical Christian thing. Our kids are down the street at the Christian school. We don't really understand it." What's kind of your elevator pitch or your quick answer to that question? What is classical Christian education?
Great. Well, before I give you an answer, I'm going to tell you 2 reasons why it's impossible to give an answer. So,
okay.
Sorry,
I know that's actually the case, but go ahead.
So one thing is, and the simple answer to your question is it depends, because I think rhetorical context, the rhetorical context matters a lot. So I'm going to give a different answer if I'm talking to a coworker on a construction site, or or a parent or a PhD in history. Or it's going to depend on
of course
whom I'm talking to.
Well, feel free to answer it with some different. Answer it according to different audience. Yeah, that's fine.
The other thing is, and then I will actually try to give you an answer, is that what we're dealing with here is a tradition that has lasted for over 2,000 years, between 2,000 and 3,000 years. So trying to give a kind of reductive answer, this is what classical Christian education is very difficult, or I should say, is going to necessarily be incomplete unless you want to give an hour-long treatise on the history of education. So those are 2 caveats. But here's the way. By the way,
you do very well. I love that. That long form answer is something that you're so brilliant in answering. But let's get back to the construction side of the neighbor next door. How does that work out?
Sure. I think when you sort of boil it down, let me start with this as a kind of entry point. And you mentioned teleology, so I'll start there. Yeah. The key difference between the understanding of education that has existed for centuries within what we would call now the classical Christian education tradition and other models of education that we see around us today, and we could talk about sort of where those came from. The biggest difference has to do with the goals of education, what the teleology is, what the purpose is. And for classical Christian education, that tradition has for centuries understood that education is fundamentally about forming a certain kind of human being who's able to live well. And we can use terms like virtue, which in the tradition just means to fulfill your function or to the capacities for which you were created or designed. So that's fundamentally the goal. How do we cultivate students who are going to be able to live well who leave our schools or our programs of education equipped for this life and for the next life. This is an eternal project. And you see that all throughout the tradition, people talking about education as preparation for death or preparation for heaven or those. So this is not about just a 10-year goal or something like that. And if you want to, again, just put it into sort of basic contrasting terms, most people today in the 21st century think of education's goals in primarily occupational or financial terms. So the ultimate goal of why you pay tuition dollars to send your child to a private school or why you pay to send them to college or all these questions about whether college is even a good investment or not. All of this tends to view education as a kind of transaction in which you put something in and then you're going to get something out. And usually those goals are stated in terms of career readiness or the ability to make money, frankly, is what it often comes down to.
Yeah. Well, so and we'll talk more about this. I mean, in and of itself, those are, one would hope that your child can graduate and actually move out successfully into the work world. And we'll get into
absolutely
the value of it. Actually, no spoiler alert here, but I do think this is, you want to be real world ready. This is the best education, but there are a lot of misunderstandings, maybe reductions that people make when they look at classical Christian and they think this is limited to something. What do you see when you go down the path of defining it? What are some of the immediate sort of assumptions people kind of come back up against you with, or concerns they may have?
Yeah, well, one question would be, okay, so then is this useful? I mean, you're saying that the goal is cultivating a certain kind of virtuous, godly human being. That's all well and good, but is it useful? And that's a kind of question that's been asked since the 5th century BC with the sophists in Athens, and certainly was asked in the 19th and 20th centuries post-industrial revolution. And kind of what you were pointing to, the answer is an overwhelming yes. So classical Christian education turns out precisely by not focusing as the ultimate goals on its usefulness at being the most useful. John Henry Newman has a great line in his book, The Idea of a University, a 19th century series of lectures he gave, where he's talking about the usefulness of education. And he says that which is good is necessarily going to be useful because good produces good. So the question to ask of an education isn't, is it useful? The question is it good? And if it's good, it's going to be useful also. But there are all kinds of useful things that aren't good. And so we see this. We have data now on graduates from classical Christian schools. We know what the numbers are in terms of, things like test scores, college entrance, and longer term life outcomes in terms of what kind of people they are as parents and grandparents. We have some of that data, and it's all it all points to the truth that's been understood by centuries and centuries of people that yes, this education is useful because it's good.
And so when your part of the answer then was differentiating from utilitarian purposes, and then you talked about even of the telos, which I haven't seen that on a school open house or a tagline yet. We're preparing you for eternity. we're going way past college. We're going straight into the afterlife. But
preparation for death and beyond.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that would fly in most schools, but I think we all want that. But practically speaking, again, kind of boots on the ground at a classical school versus maybe a Christian school or a traditional school down the street. What makes a school truly classical or even truly Christian as you think about that definition?
Yeah, it's a great question. One comment that I'll just make about what you just said about, education for death and beyond or something, is that if you ask, here's one thing that I have found very, very insightful. When I used to do, for example, prospective parent, meetings for kindergarten students, potential kindergarten students, and I would ask the parents something like, what are your goals for your child? Like, you've got little Tommy or Susie or whatever sitting beside you, and 4 years old, 5 years old, whatever. What do you hope for your son or daughter in 10 years? What do you hope for your son or daughter in 20 or 30 or 50 years? What is your hope or your prayer, your vision for what your child is going to be? And almost never does the parent of a 5-year-old respond by saying, well, I want them to, have a 6-figure salary and a nice house and be a member of the country club and be able to go on vacation twice a year. So that's not what they care about most. So I think most parents, when they're looking at their small child, understand my hopes and dreams for this child are more tied up with what kind of a person they are and how they're loving others and serving the church and their family and what kind of a mom and dad they are and all those things. And to me, that's just a little window into the fact that this understanding of education actually does resonate with what most parents I've found actually think about the future of their children.
Yeah. And I think that, the old, it's about formation, not just information. I mean, that's the oversimplified way of saying it. So within that vein of it's about formation and being truly classical and truly Christian, what does that look like as you articulate, as you see it in schools that are doing this well?
Yes, good. So I mean, there are a few distinctives that you'll see on the ground. Okay, so there are, but I would say all of those tie back or can be traced back to these fundamental principles that really distinguish. So there are things like curriculum. In a classical school, students are studying Latin. They're reading great texts. They are usually learning to read with phonics. They are studying the arts of the trivium and the quadrivium, grammar and logic and rhetoric and arithmetic, geometry, music and astronomy. There's a kind of pedagogical approach of the teacher as a master learner who's leading the students on the journey of learning. You're going to see distinctives like that, okay? But one of the things that two things. One would be, it's hard to pin down in those concrete terms. And I've had many parents or prospective parents or admissions directors who say, you can't explain it, you have to see it. So when you go to visit, I mean, this would be my encouragement to any parents who are thinking about a classical school. Go visit a number of schools, if they'll let you, and sit in a classroom, and then go visit the classical Christian school and think and see what the differences are, because you'll experience the differences. It's an ethos, it's a whole culture that's different. Yeah. So that's one thought. And then the other thing is that all of those distinctives that you see, like the curriculum or the different kind of pedagogy or the approach to grading or the kind of interactions that happen between students and teachers or the parent partnership between the school, all of those things can be shown to be tied back and grounded in these fundamental principles about the nature of the world and the human being and what education is. And that's one of the things that first drew me very strongly as somebody with a PhD in philosophy and philosophy of education to the classical Christian education world, is that I saw that the classical Christian schools were making these connections between what they said they believed and what they were actually doing. And they cared very deeply about that. And you'll see that kind of alignment.
And I think the distinctive there, and I want to take a break and I'll leave this question, you can answer it after the break. The idea of a lot of Christian education is we basically have reading, writing, arithmetic, and then we do things like, Bible class or worldview class or chapel. And the idea of formation of wisdom and virtue requires a far more integrated understanding of those things. So there is constantly, or presumably in some way, constantly an effort throughout the day, throughout the classes. I want to understand kind of that integration of how that actually plays out, because that's a huge distinctive that is often hard to understand. But I love your thought. Let's take a quick break and we'll come right back after the break. During this short break, I have a special invitation to all school leaders, administrators, and teachers. I want you to imagine for a moment stepping away from your everyday routine at school and diving deep into the rich foundations of Christian education, surrounded by world-class scholars, seasoned classroom teachers, and administrative experts with years of experience running schools with a lot of wisdom to share. That's exactly what the Herzog Foundation's Institute is offering. I've had the joy of serving as a training coach for the last few years, leading their 2.5-day training on spiritual formation and another one on parent engagement. They offer close to 50 unique training events ranging from board governance to marketing to classroom best practices. They even offer a training on how to teach the great books. And the best part of all, well, thanks to the generosity of the Herzog Foundation, these training events, including lodging, are completely free for Christian educators. Institutes are located around the country in beautiful locations, including at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., and the Reagan Library in Santa Barbara. Don't miss this incredible opportunity. Check out the details at theherzogfoundation.com. If you're seeking an education that helps your child thrive academically and spiritually, Wilson Hill Academy has spent years developing a model that I want you to know about. In their free guide, you'll see how their thoughtfully sequenced curriculum prepares students for college and how a biblical worldview helps them understand the world around them with clarity, and how their discussion-based classes teach them to think critically, not just what to think. You'll also discover how their teachers equip students to live purposefully for Christ. With accredited live online classes, your child can learn from master teachers anywhere with an internet connection, all within a community that has transformed families like yours. Download their free guide today at wilsonhillacademy.com/guide or in the link in our show notes. David, right before the break, I was just asking you to help us differentiate a bit. A lot of schools that are Christian schools, and really many wonderful schools out there, you don't have to be classical, but I think the classical distinctive is that we talk about this more holistically than just we do discipleship or we have worldview training or we have chapel on Friday. Explain what that difference looks like practically.
Yeah, absolutely. I went to a non-classical Christian school for some years, and I, as a student myself, and I know that many of the teachers and administrators and parents in those schools care deeply about the formation of their children. So I don't want to. I say that, and I think that's true. That said, what often happens in non-classical Christian schools in the 20th and now 21st century is that there's a huge disjunct between the Christian commitments and then the curriculum and pedagogy and practices and culture of the school. And it gets at exactly what you were just saying, that the problem of formation. So this is a little bit stereotypical, but it actually has a high degree of truth, or an element of truth, is that in many Christian schools, what they're doing is basically taking a secular progressive view of education, secular progressive teaching methods, secular progressive curriculum, secular progressive teachers who have been trained in secular progressive education, and then tacking on a Bible verse on the wall or a chapel once a week or a statement of faith, and thinking that then you're going to have this kind of holistic human being formation that's pervasively Christian. And unfortunately, a lot of times that just doesn't happen. So what you get is this disjunct between the Christian piece and then the rest of the academic piece. Whereas in a classical Christian school, what's happening is that the Christian commitments and the understanding of the students, and here would be some examples, the way that discipline is handled, grounded in a theological understanding of the student who's made in the image of God, but also is marred by original sin. That'd be one example. Like, that should drive everything in your discipline policy and procedure. What kind of a human being are we dealing with here? What is this person? The way that curriculum is oriented or aligned. So one of the things that happens in a lot of classical Christian schools is the different subjects are aligned such that students are studying, for example, the same historical period. So a student would be studying, medieval history while they're studying medieval literature, while they're studying historical theology 1 or something like that, right? And so, and maybe art and music also align. So what that does is it reveals to the student through the structure of the scope and sequence that all of these subjects are actually integrated and aligned. That's a deeply theological truth, that all truth is God's truth, and that all the branches of learning, whether it's math, science, art, literature, history, whatever, are different angles or windows into studying a coherent whole that God has created. So that's just a kind of simple example of a way that the curricular difference or the scope and sequence difference actually carries theological import that forms the student's understanding of the world that God has made.
Yeah, I want to go back. You brought up this the fact that there's something had changed in the progressive movement. You were talking about just a typical schools are often using kind of a secular progressive approach to education. For folks, some people don't know, and just remind us, I often make the claim that, everyone was classically Christian educated up until 125 years or so ago. And there was a shift. Just explain that real simply. What happened that caused this kind of takeover of secular progressivism that is still very much in the DNA of a lot of our schools?
Yeah. Again, you're talking about a very complicated historical phenomenon that we could talk about for hours. But here's a couple of, I would say, key summative points. One, and you're exactly right, what we call classical Christian education today for many centuries was just called education. So even the term wasn't used. But at the end of the 19th century, there were cataclysmic changes that happened. All right. And here were a couple of them. One, in the post-industrial revolution world, there was a need for technically skilled workers. And in that context, the goals or the teleology of education shifted. So this idea of education being primarily driven by the useful, that arose in a way that it had not historically before, because there was a need for use. So you get people, industry leaders saying things like, why should students be studying these old dead books and ideas when industry is forging forward and we need workers to to help lead progress? That kind of an idea. That's one thing. Another thing that happened in the second half of the 19th and then the 20th century is you had a process of secularization. So education, which all throughout history had been understood to be intrinsically religious, and this is true within the Christian tradition. It's true of other traditions as well. Even the ancient pagans understood education is necessarily intrinsically religious. And in the last 150 years, we've tried this radical shift from that, where we've tried to say that you can separate our religious nature as human beings from the process of education. And if you just think historically, I mean, in the United States, it's different in different countries, but in the United States, from a historical perspective, this is radically new. I mean, prayer was a daily occurrence in public schools all across the United States until the 1960s. I mean, that's not very long ago, right? So you had this shift in the teleology. You had a shift in the role that religion and the understanding of the religious commitments played. And then a final thing would be you had a rise of what we might call child-centered education, or the idea, and this goes the whole way back to Rousseau and then through various other thinkers, but the idea that education is fundamentally about meeting the child where he is at and meeting the child's needs and entering into the child's experience, as opposed to focusing on where education is going and the goals toward which you are leading the child. And that fundamentally shifted a lot of things having to do with pedagogy and curriculum and the way that the practice of education was done.
Yeah, and it's that whole adage of, putting the child on the path or creating the path for the child, or it's like who's leading this process, and it is very child-centered. And I think it's also, to your comment, it's on the one hand, traditional Christian religion was pulled out, but I think you would make the case that actually every school teaches religion or forms of paideia. So that's also the misnomer, is that my child, will do the Christian stuff on the weekends at home or in the evenings. And even if they're not in a Christian school, they're still getting indoctrinated into quite a number of ways of seeing themselves in the world around them, especially if it's all about being child-centered. So there's nothing neutral out there. So that's helpful, David, just to understand a bit of where we've come from. So the bottom line is, this is not some, 40, 50 years ago, roughly, is when that resurgence began. That's just, so many of our schools right now are celebrating their 25th or 30th anniversary. This is a rediscovery of a proven way of education. It's not just nostalgia. It's not just people afraid of the world that want to create a Mayberry and put little kids in cute uniforms and churn butter. I mean, this is a very much focus, although we do churn some butter, but there really is a desire to be real world ready
and make catapults and other stuff. Yeah.
And make catapults. And, and I actually remember, quite honestly, I remember Dad a few years ago pulled his kid from our school, and he was, smart guy, ran a private equity thing. He was smart, but he could not get his head around, you guys you're so backwards focused. It's as if the only people that ever made any sense in the world were people that wore togas. And I mean, I was like, boy, we have failed to communicate this, which is why I love this conversation we're having right now.
Yeah,
but I do want to, maybe we'll take another break and come back, because I want to just shift into this, reaffirming again, this is the real world ready, future focus, future proofing, if you will, of a generation. And what does that look like in terms of ways we do that in our school and ways we can complement that in our home? Love your
Davies,
thoughts
can I
on
make
that.
one comment?
Yes, please, David. Yeah.
Looking backward to riff off of what you said.
Yeah,
and
riff
that
away.
is that you're exactly right, that this is not what we know in the 20th and now 21st centuries as the classical Christian movement, or the classical Christian renewal movement, or the classical Christian renewal, or whatever you call it. This is not something new. This is not a new ism that somebody made up. Mm-hmm. This is a rediscovery of a tradition that has defined education and defined the church for millennia, and that only very recently, particularly like I was saying at the end of the 19th century, fell out of mainstream. This was just the standard. And so, and it is not to glorify. I think this is really important as we move into talk about the future and looking forward. Yeah. This is not a glorification of the past simply because it's old, but this is a recognition that we are the inheritors of a tradition and of an inheritance that is rich and deep, and that it would be foolish and ignorant to ignore. I mean, it would be sort of like saying, we're going to start a church. A bunch of Christians get together and say, we're going to start a church, but we're going to ignore everything that Christians did before 1900 or 2000. You say, well, that's just foolish. How can you even do that? There's a tradition that stretches back millennia. You can't just make this up. And yet that's exactly what we're doing in what I might call mainstream education today. We're trying to make it up, but because we reject the wisdom of the past and think that we can figure out how to do it better. And again, in addition to just kind of the conceptual foolishness of that, it also doesn't work. Like the data just shows this is not a winning strategy. So I wanted to make that historical point. Thanks.
Great point. Yeah, I love that idea of let's just draw a line in the 20th century and go there. From this point forward, we're going to reject the past, move forward. And you certainly could, again, another day's podcast, the whole let's do one-to-one technology with every kid, because that's the new way to educate. And now we're seeing all the wheels fall off that bus. So, all right, we're going to take a quick break and come right back and talk about future proofing. Today's episode of BaseCamp Live is brought to you by my friend Chris Casper, who you heard on a recent episode. His invention, the Wise Phone, is a much-needed third way, providing a solution from the dangers of a smartphone on the one hand and the limited capacities of an old-school flip phone on the other. His simple, distraction-free phone design for families who want technology to serve their real lives and give us and our older children a way to do basic essentials like calling or texting or maps without the web browser and the social media and the endless apps that can pull them and us into the addictive time-wasting aspects of a smartphone. I personally have a Wise Phone, and I can vouch that it is an excellent solution and an appropriate way to use technology that supports virtue and focus and healthy habits. Check out the link in our show notes and on our BaseCamp Live website partners page, where Chris is offering BaseCamp Live listeners a discount.
Every school year tells a story. The big chapters, like the first day of class or graduation, are easy to see. But the real heart of the story is often written in the quieter pages. A science experiment that sparks wonder, a class pausing to memorize a psalm, a teacher encouraging perseverance when the work gets hard. Those are the moments parents long to hear. That's why we created Zipcast. Each week, families receive a short 10 to 12 minute episode, local updates from their school leaders, paired with syndicated wisdom from trusted national experts in both Christian parenting and education. Parents can listen in the rhythm of daily life, on the drive to practice, while making dinner, or during a quiet walk. Nearly 100 schools are already using Zipcast this year to strengthen trust and community, and fall or winter isn't too late to sign up. It's often the best time to begin. Save your spot at zipcast.media. Zipcast, encouraging you on the go with what you need to know.
David, we've talked about the throughout this, just the encouragement that what we're building here, I believe, again, is the last, not just me, I think it's the last best hope for our civilization, raising up a generation that's deeply steeped in knowing who they are and the world that they're in, have wisdom and virtue. The idea being, let's future-proof them for whatever's going to come their way. There is a lot of concern with things like the rise of AI, the impact it's having on our culture. How do you react when people ask you about that? Like, it seems at face value that an AI world would not be where the butter churning classical people are going to be successful, but we've just determined they do more than churn butter. So how do you answer that?
Sure. I would first address the AI question, which I know is on everyone's minds as we're talking here in 2026. I would start by going backward a little bit, going back a generation and talking about the way that technology and so-called educational technologies have worked. And because many of the arguments for this kind of technological futurism or progressivism with regard to AI were made years past for televisions and computers and one-to-one things in classrooms, et cetera. So here would be a kind of quick conceptual way of thinking about this. It is true that classical Christian schools tend to be low tech in terms of what we think of as digital technology in education today. Okay? However, classical Christian schools are preparing students for a highly technological world, or a world in which technology is changing very fast, precisely by not focusing on the technologies of today. So here would be an example. The parent who comes and says, "Oh, you don't have one-to-one Chromebooks in the elementary classrooms. How are you going to prepare students for the future? Every other school we visited has one-to-one Chromebooks or whatever the device is, right?" And you say, okay, well, your little Isabella is 7 years old right now. Do you think that by the time she graduates from high school or college, that Chromebooks are going to be the cutting edge technology that everybody needs to know how to use? And the answer is obviously no. Okay.
Right.
We have no idea what the world of our elementary students or even our high school students is going to be when they are entering the workforce or changing careers changing jobs mid-career or whatever. We have no idea how to project that. Okay, so what classical education is doing is it's saying, let's teach our students the basic skills of thinking and of learning and of communicating. Those are the basic skills that will enable students to go out and adapt as technology changes in ways that we can't predict. Now, there are certain basic competencies, like classical Christian schools are teaching students how to type, for example, or requiring that the parents do it. I mean, there are these basic skills that they need to have. But most of the skills that let's say, mainstream schools are focusing on with regard to technology are really very basic. I mean, Neil Postman makes the comment at one point, sort of jokingly, he says that the cognitive skills to watch television are so minimal that in the history of the human race, nobody has been diagnosed with a TV watching disability. I mean, he's making a kind of comical point, but he's saying, like, look, learning to use a mouse or learning how to surf the internet or plug things into Chat GPT these are not highly these are skills that students will learn. So that would be one kind of angle of answer.
Yeah, it's a great answer to that. And again, worthy of a whole nother conversation. In the final few minutes, just if you had a moment to speak directly to Christian educators, teachers in general, what would you say by word of encouragement under this idea of what is classical Christian, just helping them really anchor to those the core principles that make classical Christian schools so unique?
Sure. One final comment about AI and looking forward then to apply it would be this. I have no idea sitting here in 2026 what AI is going to do over the next 10 years or how it's going to transform society. Okay. None of us do. I have deep concerns about the way that we are farming out fundamental human capacities to machines. So if you think about the disciplines of the trivium, for example, our ability as humans to use language, to communicate, we are rational animals. That's what sets us apart from the rest of the animal kingdom. The way that we use logic and rationality in order to persuasively communicate with each other, that's rhetoric. Those are fundamental distinguishers of what it means to be a human being. And my prediction will be, to use the kind of example of one-to-one Chromebooks that I just gave, my prediction is that in a world in which the majority of the masses, let's say, have been brought up dependent on AI, the people who are going to be the leaders are going to be the people who know how to communicate and who know how to think and who know how to be persuasive. Those are the skills that classical Christian schools are giving to our students. Yeah. So the masses may be, in a very real way, subhuman in the sense that they have not developed those fundamental human skills. And I would predict that in that world, the people who have been classically educated are going to be light years ahead in their ability to have impact and influence. So that's a kind of way. Here would be my encouragement. Yeah. My encouragement to teachers and then maybe to parents, or to both. My encouragement would be this: what you're engaged in here is a beautiful thing. Again, for a prospective parent, go and visit a school. For a teacher, go and visit a school. At one point in my career, I turned down a tenure track college chair of a philosophy department job to go teach and be an administrator in a classical Christian school because, in part, I was so impacted and awed by the level of education that I saw happening at the high school level at that school. Okay, so go and visit a school. This is a beautiful thing. It is a humane thing. It is a kind of education in which parent and school and student and teacher are working together toward common goals. And it is, children are coming out of this who are incredibly well adapted, who are incredibly ready for society. And at the same time, if all of those sort of philosophical and theological aspirational goals don't get you hooked, this is where it's at in terms of education right now. I mean, a study just came out recently saying that Arcadia did this study. Classical education, enrollment in classical K-12 schools is growing in the United States at about 5% a year. This is the fastest growing kind of education within Christian education. Classical Christian education is the fastest. Within the charter school world, classical charter education is the fastest. In other words, you want to be futuristic. This is the education of tomorrow, man. This is where it's at. And the reason why this is where it's at, as state legislatures are changing policies, whether it's in the realm of classical Christian homeschooling, the reason why this movement is growing so fast and is getting such momentum, not only in the United States, but around the world, is because it is both grounded in history and tradition, and it also works. So this is not an either or, this is a both and. So my encouragement would be, go check it out. For the teachers, you'll find an intellectual home, a place where teaching is a valued and wonderful profession. And for parents, you'll find a place where your kid can grow and learn and be formed holistically. It's a wonderful thing, and I'm blessed to be a part of it.
Well, David, thank you so much. That's a great, inspiring words, and I love the idea that we're leading the way. We're part of something that strikes that deep need for something better and different and proven. And so, thank you for your perspective and helping us answer that seemingly simple question, what is classical Christian, which has such depth to it. And thank you for bringing that alive.
All the great questions don't have simple answers, or many of them, I should say. But
many of them require some depth. Well, thanks for making it a little bit better, easier to understand. So, hey, if anybody wants to learn more about the work you've done and other resources you have, what's a good way to connect with you?
Sure. If anybody wants to, I have a page on the Hillsdale College site, hillsdale.edu, a faculty page that they can look at. People can reach out and contact me. I also would encourage them to go look at alcuinfellowship.com, ALCUIN fellowship.com to see what the work that the Alcuin Fellowship is doing. And I'm happy to connect with people and serve however I can.
Yeah, David, you're such a great encourager to the movement. Thank you so much for your time today. It's always good to have you on.
Thanks so much, Davies.
Thank you for listening to this episode of BaseCamp Live. Be sure to check out our website, basecamplive.com, for more than 8 years of timeless episodes that you'll find helpful and encouraging, as well as the helpful resources offered on our partners page. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of our partners like the Herzog Foundation. See you back next week.